My mother was barely in the ground when my stepfather slammed a countdown timer onto the kitchen table. He gave me exactly 1 hour to pack my things and leave because he had already sold the house. I stared at the forged signature on the deed, then at the menacing black SUV waiting outside. I realized stopping him was the wrong move. I would let him sell the estate right in front of me instead. My name is Phoebe Hayes, and at 32 years old, I stood in the kitchen of the only home I had ever known, watching the last remnants of my life disintegrate faster than the soil settling on my mother's fresh grave. The scent of funeral lilies still clung to my hair, a cloying and suffocating perfume that made the air in the room feel thick enough to choke on. My stepfather, Dale Mercer, did not look like a grieving widower. He looked like a man who was running out of time. He stood on the other side of the granite island, his knuckles white as he pressed a single sheet of paper against the countertop. Beside the paper sat a kitchen timer, the cheap plastic kind with a loud mechanical tick. He twisted the dial with a violent jerk, setting the spring into motion. 1 hour, that was what he said to me. 1 hour to get my trash out of his house because he had already sold it. The silence that followed his declaration was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of that timer. It sounded less like a kitchen tool and more like the heartbeat of a dying animal. I looked down at the document beneath his hand. It was a quitclaim deed. The legal language was standard, cold, and impersonal, stripping away rights and ownership in clean paragraphs. But my eyes went straight to the bottom of the page, to the signature line. There was my mother's name, Elizabeth Hayes Mercer. I stared at the ink. It was blue ballpoint, pressed hard into the paper, creating ridges that I could see even from this distance. Dale claimed she had signed this before she slipped into the coma, before the machines took over the job of keeping her lungs inflating. He claimed she wanted to simplify things. I knew my mother's hand better than I knew my own face. She had been a woman of grace and precision, a high school literature teacher who graded papers with a fountain pen and a fluid, elegant script. Even when she was sick, even when the weakness began to eat away at her muscle mass, she maintained a certain dignity in her movements. The signature on the table was a jagged, terrified scrawl. The loop of the L was broken. The slant was erratic, leaning backward as if the hand holding the pen was being forced against its will. It looked like the writing of a person in the throes of a seizure, or worse, the writing of a person guiding the limp hand of an unconscious woman. It was a forgery, and a desperate, clumsy one at that. I lifted my eyes to Dale. He was avoiding my gaze, pretending to arrange a stack of mail on the counter. But I saw the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He was wearing his black funeral suit, the tie loosened, looking every bit the exhausted husband to the outside world. But in this kitchen, the mask had slipped. "You are lying." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the paper from under his hand and shred it into confetti. I wanted to call the police and have them drag him out of here for desecrating my mother's memory before the flowers on her casket had even wilted. But I did not scream. Something in my gut, a cold instinct honed by years of watching Dale manage our finances with slippery excuses, told me to pause. I turned my head slowly toward the bay window that overlooked the front yard. The rain had started to fall again, a gray drizzle that blurred the world outside. Through the wet glass, I saw it. A black Chevrolet Tahoe was parked just beyond the wrought iron gate. It was idling, the white exhaust puffing rhythmically into the damp air. 2 men sat in the front seats. Even through the rain and the tint, I could tell they were not real estate agents. They were too large. Their necks were thick, their postures rigid. They were not looking at the landscaping or assessing the curb appeal. They were watching the front door. They were watching Dale. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow, the rush, the desperate need to liquidate the asset, the forged deed. This was not just greed. Greed can wait a week. Greed can wait for probate. This was fear. Dale had borrowed money from people who did not use the court system to collect their debts. And now that his safety net, my mother, was gone, the sharks were circling. I looked back at Dale. He was not evicting me because he hated me. Though I knew he held no love for the stepdaughter who asked too many questions about the bank accounts, he was evicting me because I was an obstacle. I was debris in the path of his escape route. Before I could speak, the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed from the hallway. The rhythm was sharp, confident, and entirely out of place in a house of mourning. Kendra walked into the kitchen. She was wearing black, but that was where the respect for the occasion ended. Her dress was cut specifically to draw the eye, tight and revealing. She moved with a proprietary air, trailing a hand along the wall as if she were mentally redecorating Dale's mistress, the woman he had introduced as a home healthcare aide 6 months ago, the woman who had spent more time drinking my mother's wine in the guest room than checking vitals. Dale finally looked up, his eyes darting between me and Kendra. "You need to hurry." "Phoebe," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The buyers want possession immediately. Kendra needs to get the master bedroom ready." The audacity took my breath away. He was not just selling the house. He was moving his mistress into my mother's sanctuary to stage it. Kendra stopped beside him, leaning her hip against the counter. She offered me a pitying smile that did not reach her eyes. She reached up to tuck a strand of dyed blonde hair behind her ear, and the movement caught the light. My heart stopped. On her ring finger sat a sapphire. It was a deep, velvet blue, surrounded by a halo of small, antique-cut diamonds. It was my grandmother's ring. My mother had worn it every day of my life until her fingers became too swollen from the treatment. She had put it in the wall safe in the study. She had told me, explicitly, that it was mine. Seeing it on Kendra's hand felt like a physical violation. It was as if she had dug up my mother's body and stripped the jewelry from her cold fingers. "Nice ring," I said. My voice sounded flat, dead. Kendra glanced at her hand, admiring the stone. "Dale gave it to me. He said it was too heavy for a young girl like you to carry." I looked at Dale. He flinched. For a second, the bully vanished, replaced by a coward who knew he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But then he remembered the black Tahoe outside, and the fear hardened him back into cruelty. "Don't make a scene. Phoebe," he warned, taking a step toward me. "Don't make me look bad in front of the investors. I have people coming here to finalize things. If you ruin this for me, you will regret it." Investors. He called the thugs outside investors. The anger inside me was a rising tide, hot and corrosive. I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. If I cried, he won. If I begged, he won. If I fought him physically, he would call the police and paint me as the unstable, grieving daughter attacking the mourning husband. He would use my outburst to validate whatever lies he had told about me to get that deed signed. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be cold. I looked at the timer. 50 minutes left. I straightened my spine. I looked at the quitclaim deed one last time, memorizing the frantic slant of that forged signature. I looked at the ring on Kendra's finger. I looked at the panic in Dale's eyes. "You want to sell the house?" "Dale," I asked softly. "I am selling the house," he corrected, puffing his chest out. "It is done." I nodded slowly. The air in the kitchen felt electric, charged with the unspoken threat of the men outside and the ghost of the woman whose signature lay on the table. "Go ahead," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet kitchen, it sounded like a gunshot. "Sell it, if you dare." Dale blinked, confused by my lack of resistance. He had expected a tantrum. He had expected me to fall to my knees. He did not know what to do with a threat that was delivered with such calm. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen, past the living room where the furniture was already draped in dust sheets, and up the stairs to my room. My bedroom was a time capsule of the last 3 decades, but I did not look at the posters or the books. I moved with mechanical efficiency. I pulled a suitcase from the closet. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack shoes. I went to my desk. I disconnected my laptop. I grabbed the external hard drives that contained my photography portfolio and, more importantly, the backups of the household data. I took the small box from my nightstand that held my birth certificate and the few letters my mother had written to me when I was in college. I left the rest. I left the wardrobe full of coats. I left the furniture. I left the comfort of the only space that had ever been truly mine. They were not just kicking me out. They were erasing me. They wanted to scrub the house clean of Phoebe Hayes so they could turn my mother's legacy into cash for a gambling debt or a bad loan. Let them have the furniture, I thought as I zipped the bag shut. The wood and fabric were not the house. The house was something else. I walked back downstairs. Dale and Kendra were still in the kitchen, probably celebrating their victory, probably thinking I was a beaten dog slinking away with its tail between its legs. I did not say goodbye. I did not look at them. I opened the front door and stepped out into the rain. The cold water hit my face, mixing with the heat of my rage. I walked down the path, the wheels of my suitcase rumbling over the wet pavement. As I reached the end of the driveway, I felt the eyes of the men in the Tahoe on me. They watched me pass, their heads turning in unison. I ignored them. They were part of the equation now, variables that Dale had introduced, and variables that I would eventually have to solve for. I reached my car, an old sedan parked on the street because Dale had insisted his new sports car needed the garage space. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and stood there for a moment, rain soaking through my funeral dress from the porch. I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. Then, the distinct, mechanical click of a deadbolt sliding into place. Dale had locked me out. He had sealed the tomb. I got into my car and slammed the door, shutting out the sound of the rain. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, breathing in the scent of old upholstery and damp wool. My phone, resting in the center console, buzzed. The screen lit up, cutting through the gloom of the car's interior. It was a notification. A simple, automated alert from the smart home system I had installed for my mother 2 years ago because she worried about break-ins. System alert. Front door manually locked. User manual override. I stared at the glowing text. A strange, bitter smile touched my lips. Dale had the physical key. He had the forged deed. He had the mistress wearing my inheritance. He thought he held all the cards, but he had forgotten who set up the network. He had forgotten who programmed the security codes, the cameras, and the remote access protocols. He had forgotten that in a modern house, the person who holds the brass key is simply a guest. The person who holds the admin password is God. I picked up the phone and swiped the notification away. He wanted to sell the house. He wanted to play the big shot with his investors and his stolen ring. Fine, I whispered to the empty car. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving Willow Ridge behind in the rearview mirror. I would let him sell it. I would let him sign every paper. I would let him dig the hole so deep that he could never climb out. And then, when the ink was dry and the money was supposed to change hands, I would be there. The countdown timer in the kitchen might have been ticking for me, but Dale Mercer had no idea that he had just started a countdown of his own, and his clock was running much faster than mine. The apartment I found was on the edge of Ridgehaven, North Carolina, in a complex that looked like it had been built with good intentions in the 70s and then abandoned to rot shortly after. It was a studio, a generous term for a single room where the kitchen, bedroom, and living area were forced into an awkward, claustrophobic intimacy. The rent was low, which was the only reason I was there, but the cost was paid in other ways. The air inside smelled permanently of stale coffee grounds and damp drywall, a scent that clung to the back of my throat no matter how many windows I cracked open. The floor was covered in a linoleum that might have once been white but had yellowed into the color of old teeth, and it was cold. It was a seeping, relentless chill that moved up through the soles of my feet and settled in my bones. I sat on the edge of the mattress I had dragged in from the car, surrounded by the few cardboard boxes that now contained my entire life. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the high ceilings and crown molding of Willow Ridge. But as I looked at the water stains spreading across the ceiling like a map of a forgotten country, I did not feel the sting of poverty. I felt the ache of memory. For the last 6 months, My reality had not been the luxury of my mother's estate. It had been the sterile, beeping world of her sick room. I closed my eyes and the smell of the mildew faded, replaced by the sharp antiseptic scent of the hospital-grade cleaners we had used at home. I could still feel the hard plastic of the chair I had slept in next to her bed. It was a folding chair, the kind you find in church basements, and I had spent so many nights curled up in it that my spine felt permanently curved to fit its unforgiving shape. I remembered the nights when the silence of the house was so heavy, it felt like physical weight. I would be the one awake, watching the digital numbers on the oxygen monitor, counting the seconds between the rise and fall of her chest. I learned to be a nurse out of necessity. I learned how to crush pills into applesauce so she could swallow them without choking. I learned how to adjust the flow of the morphine drip just enough to ease the grimace of pain from her face, without sending her into the deep fog where she couldn't hear me say I loved her. I was there. I was always there. And Dale. The anger flared in my chest. Hot and sudden. Dale was never there, in my memory. I saw him standing in the doorway of the sick room, always dressed in a suit, always checking his watch. He played the part of the busy executive perfectly. He would sigh, running a hand through his hair, and tell me he had to go to Charlotte or Raleigh for business. He claimed he was working tirelessly to keep the estate afloat, to pay for the experimental treatments that the insurance companies refused to cover. "I will be back on Tuesday," he would say, avoiding my eyes. "Keep me updated. Phoebe." But I was not just a grieving daughter. I was a professional. I worked for Brightstone Fiduciary Services. My entire career was built on tracking assets, auditing trusts, and spotting the discrepancies that people tried to hide in the margins of ledgers. I knew how money moved, and more importantly, I knew what it looked like when money was being bled. While my mother slept, I had logged into the household accounts. I had seen the activity. It was frantic. It was messy. There were no large transfers to hospitals or specialists. Instead, there were withdrawals. $500 here, $900 there. They were always cash withdrawals, always from ATMs in parts of the city where Dale had no business being. They were just under the threshold that would trigger a bank security alert, but the frequency was alarming. It looked like the behavior of a man who was trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. He was burning through cash, not for business, but for survival. I had confronted him once, about 2 months before the end. I found him in the kitchen, pouring a drink at 10 in the morning. "We are bleeding cash." "Dale," I had said, placing a printed statement on the counter. "Where is this going?" He had laughed. A dismissive, patronizing sound that made my skin crawl. He didn't even look at the paper. "You are a kid." "Phoebe," he had sneered, taking a sip of his bourbon. "You file papers. You don't understand high finance or the liquidity required to manage a portfolio of this size. Leave the money to the men. Sweetheart, go change your mother's sheets." He thought I was a secretary. He thought my job at Brightstone was answering phones. He had no idea that I spent my days forensic auditing estates for clients who had net worths 10 times the size of his. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I was looking at a gambling addict or a debtor who was being squeezed by loan sharks. And then there was Kendra. The memory shifted, bringing a fresh wave of nausea. Dale had brought her in 4 months ago. He introduced her as a certified home health aide, someone to help with the heavy lifting so I could get some rest. "Thank God for Kendra," he had said, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "She comes highly recommended." But Kendra did not know how to read a blood pressure cuff. I watched her the first week. She fumbled with the oxygen tanks. She forgot the dosage times. But she was an expert at one-thing inventory. I would come back from a quick shower to find her not by my mother's bedside, but in the master suite. I caught her once, standing in front of the vanity, holding a crystal perfume bottle up to the light. She wasn't cleaning it. She was assessing it. Her eyes moved over the room, lingering on the antique silver brushes, the silk curtains, the heavy jewelry box on the dresser. It was the look of a vulture circling a dying animal, waiting for the heart to stop beating so the feast could begin. When I asked her what she was doing, she had smiled, That same vacuous, sticky smile she gave me today in the kitchen. Just dusting. "Hun," she had said, "just making sure everything is nice for when she wakes up." We both knew my mother was never going to wake up and use that perfume again. Kendra was shopping. I shook my head, trying to dispel the image of Kendra in my mother's room. I needed to focus. I needed to find the anchor in this storm. I stood up and walked over to the stack of boxes. I found the one marked personal. This was the box I had packed in a frenzy while Dale's timer ticked down. Inside were the letters, my birth certificate, and a few framed photos. My hands trembled slightly as I dug through the papers. I was looking for something specific, something small. I went back to a night 3 weeks ago. It was one of the last times my mother was truly lucid. The pain medication had worn off slightly, and her eyes, usually cloudy, were sharp and clear. She had reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was weak, her skin paper-thin. But there was an urgency in her touch that frightened me. "Phoebe," she had whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I am here, Mom," I had said, leaning close. "The house," she gasped. "The house belongs to you. Do not let him take it. He is in trouble. Bad trouble. I know. Mom, I know." She had fumbled under her pillow. Her hand came out holding a small, silver USB drive. It was tiny, barely the size of my thumb, but she held it like it was a holy relic. "If anything happens," she said, pressing it into my palm, "keep this. It is all here. The truth." I had taken the drive. I had put it in the small velvet box where I kept my spare earrings, and I had tucked that box inside the larger keepsake box on my bookshelf. I thought it was safe. I thought I had time to look at it later. Now, in the dim light of the studio apartment, I found the velvet box. I opened it, empty. My stomach dropped. I turned the box over, shaking it as if the laws of physics might suddenly change and the drive would fall out. Nothing. I tore through the rest of the cardboard box. I flipped through the pages of the books. I shook out the folded sweaters. It was gone. I sat back on my heels, the cold of the linoleum seeping through my jeans. Dale. It had to be him. While I was at the funeral home making arrangements, while I was standing at the graveside receiving condolences, he must have gone through my room. He knew. He must have seen her give it to me. Or maybe he just knew that my mother was meticulous and would leave a trail. He had ransacked my room before he even evicted me. He didn't just kick me out to sell the house. He kicked me out to separate me from the evidence. He had sanitized the crime scene before I even knew a crime had been committed. I felt a sob rising in my throat. A hot, jagged thing that threatened to break me. I had lost my mother. I had lost my home. And now, I had lost the one weapon she had tried to give me. I felt small. I felt defeated. I felt exactly how Dale wanted me to feel, like a child who didn't understand how the world worked. I let one tear fall. It was hot on my cheek. Then, I wiped it away. I stared at the empty velvet box. I thought about Dale's smug face. I thought about Kendra wearing my grandmother's sapphire ring. I thought about the fake signature on the deed. And then, I looked at my laptop sitting on the floor. My mother was a teacher. She wrote things down. She saved physical copies. That was her generation. She trusted things she could hold. But I was the one who dragged Willow Ridge into the 21st century. I was the one who installed the mesh Wi-Fi system. I was the one who set up the smart security cameras, the automated locks, and the cloud server for the household media. Dale was a man who thought technology was a nuisance. He never remembered his passwords. He never updated his software. He thought that if he took the physical USB drive, he had taken the data. My pulse began to speed up, not from panic, but from adrenaline, the smart home network. When I set it up, I created a redundancy. I worked in data security for estates. I knew that physical drives failed and that fires happened. I had configured the system to perform a mirrored backup of any external drive connected to the main study computer. If my mother had plugged that USB into the desktop to load files onto it, or even just to view them, The system would have ghosted a copy to the secure partition on the cloud server. Dale didn't know about the partition. He didn't even know the server existed. To him, the cloud was just a word people used for the internet. I reached for my laptop. I opened the lid, the screen illuminating the dark, miserable apartment with a blue glow. I typed in the address for the remote server. My fingers flew across the keys. I wasn't crying anymore. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it had been pushed aside by something colder, sharper. I didn't need to beg a judge for a temporary restraining order that Dale would just ignore. I didn't need to plead with the police to intervene in what they would see as a domestic civil dispute. I logged into the admin panel. Access granted. I looked at the file directory. There it was, a folder time-stamped 3 weeks ago. I didn't open it yet. I just stared at the file size. It was massive. Whatever was in there, it wasn't just a will. It was a history. I leaned back against the wall, the smell of stale coffee no longer bothering me. Dale wanted to play dirty. He wanted to use muscle and forgery and intimidation. He thought he had won because he held the physical ground. He thought he had cast me out into the wilderness. But he had forgotten that the wilderness is where the wolves live. I wasn't going to go back to Willow Ridge and knock on the door. I wasn't going to stand on the lawn and scream. I was going to build a stage. I was going to write a script. And I was going to let Dale and Kendra perform every single act of their own destruction, thinking they were the stars of the show. Right up until the curtain fell. I looked at the screen one last time, a grim satisfaction settling over me. Let them have the house for now. I had the truth, and in my line of work, the truth was worth a lot more than brick and mortar. The blue glow of the laptop screen was the only light in my dank studio apartment, casting long, shivering shadows against the peeling paint of the walls. I sat cross-legged on the bare mattress, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had already secured the data from the backup drive, the files my mother had tried to give me, but that was historical data. It was proof of the past. To stop Dale now, I need something current. I need to know what he is doing in real time. I navigated to the login portal for the main Willow Ridge security system. This was the network I had built. I knew every node, every sensor, every camera angle. I typed in my administrator username and the complex alphanumeric password I had used for 2 years. I hit enter. The screen blinked. A red box appeared in the center. Access denied. Invalid credentials. My stomach tightened. I tried again. Thinking perhaps my fingers had slipped on the keys in my exhaustion, I typed slowly, enunciating every keystroke. Access denied. I sat back, the breath hissing out of me. Dale was not a technical genius. He struggled to operate the smart TV remote, but he was paranoid, and paranoia makes people thorough. He must have hired someone, maybe the same people who swept the house for bugs, to reset the system immediately after he locked the door behind me. He had locked me out of the cameras. He had blinded me. For a moment, panic flared hot and sharp in my chest. Without eyes inside the house, I was just an angry stepdaughter with a conspiracy theory. I could not prove he was destroying assets. I could not prove he was bringing buyers in before probate was settled. I was outside the walls, and the walls were high. I rubbed my temples, trying to force my brain to work through the fog of grief and lack of sleep. Think, Phoebe, you are a fiduciary. You look for the things people try to hide. You look for the assets off the books. And then, I remembered. The panic subsided, replaced by a slow, creeping realization that made my pulse quicken. 5 months ago, I had started to suspect that Kendra was not just incompetent, but negligent. I had come home early one day to find my mother's oxygen tube disconnected while Kendra was in the garden on a personal call. When I confronted her, she had lied to my face. That was the day I stopped trusting the official channels. That was the day I installed the ghost system. It was not part of the house's main network. It did not show up on the central hub's device list. I had bought 2 high-end, independent spy cameras with their own long-life battery packs and separate cellular data connections. I had hidden them where no one would ever look. One was wedged into the hollow spine of a fake encyclopedia on the top shelf of the library, overlooking Dale's desk. The other was concealed inside the ventilation grate in the corner of the master bedroom. They were completely separate. They were invisible, and because Dale did not know they existed, he could not change the passwords. I opened a new browser window. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. I typed in the IP address for the ghost system. The login screen was plain, gray, unbranded. I typed in the password. It was not a random string of numbers this time. It was a phrase my mother used to say to me when I was a child, a private joke between us that Dale had never heard. Enter. The screen went black for a second, the loading wheel spinning. I held my breath. If the batteries had died, if he had found them, if the signal was blocked. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 2 live feeds popped up on my screen. The library was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the curtains. The master bedroom was empty, the bed unmade. I did not need the live feed. I needed the history. I needed to see what happened when the doors were closed and the masks came off. I clicked on the archive tab. I dragged the timeline slider back. I went past the eviction, past the funeral service. I stopped at the night before the funeral. The thumbnail for the library feed lit up. I clicked play. The video was crisp, 4K resolution capturing every detail of the room where my mother used to grade her papers. Now, it was Dale's domain. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. Dale was sitting at the heavy mahogany desk. He was not grieving. He was celebrating. In his hand was a crystal tumbler filled with a dark amber liquid. I recognized the bottle sitting on the blotter. It was the Chateau Margaux my mother had been saving for my wedding. He had cracked it open like it was cheap beer. The door opened, and Kendra walked in. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized instantly. It was my mother's. The sight of it on her body made bile rise in my throat. But I forced myself to watch. She didn't walk like a servant. She walked like she owned the floorboards beneath her feet. She spun around in the leather guest chair, laughing as the silk flared out around her. I turned the volume up. The audio was crystal clear, picking up even the hum of the refrigerator in the minibar. "Is it done?" Kendra asked. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, looking at a document lying in front of Dale. Dale took a heavy swig of the wine. He looked haggard, his eyes rimmed with red, but there was a manic energy to his movements. "It is done," he said. His voice was slurred but distinct. Kendra picked up the paper. She squinted at it. "God, Dale, look at this line," she said, tracing the bottom of the page with a manicured nail. "It is shaky. It looks wrong. Do you think the notary will notice?" I leaned closer to the screen, my breath fogging the glass. They were talking about the deed. They were talking about the forgery. Dale snatched the paper back from her. "It does not matter if it is shaky," he snapped. "She was sick. People expect shaky. It just needs to pass for 48 hours. That is all I need. Just 48 hours to get the wire transfer cleared and the title transferred to the shell company." He leaned back, running a hand over his face. "Those guys in the Tahoe, they are not going to wait for probate. Kendra, if I do not have the cash by Friday, they are going to start breaking things, and they will start with my legs." I froze. This was it. This was the confession. He wasn't just admitting to a civil tort. He was admitting to a conspiracy. He was admitting that he knew the title was bad, that the signature was questionable, and that the sale was a fraudulent conveyance designed to launder the asset before the debt collectors or the rightful heir could stop him. "Just sell it cheap," Kendra said, pouring herself a glass of my mother's wine. "Who cares about the market value? Just get enough to pay them off and get us a condo in Florida." "That is the plan," Dale muttered. "I have a buyer lined up. Cash deal. No inspections. No questions. We close. We take the money. And we disappear before Phoebe's little lawyer friends can file an injunction. By the time they realize the deed is bad, we will be gone." I paused the video. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. I had suspected greed. I had suspected he was selfish. But this was different. This was a calculated, criminal enterprise. He was planning to defraud a buyer, defraud the estate, and run with the money. He wasn't just an evil stepfather. He was a felon in the making. I hit play again. I needed more. I needed everything. I switched to the camera view from the master bedroom. The timeline was 20 minutes later. Kendra was standing in front of the full-length mirror. The room was a mess of clothes, my mother's clothes, pulled from the walk-in closet and discarded on the floor. Kendra was holding up a black dress against her body, posing, turning from side to side. Then, she stopped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring, the sapphire ring. She slid it onto her finger. She held her hand up to the light, twisting it so the facets caught the glow of the chandelier. She laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "It fits perfectly," she said to her reflection. She admired the stone, preening. Then she said the words that would burn themselves into my brain forever. She said, "This suits me better than the dead person." She never had the style to pull this off anyway. She was too boring. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tiny apartment. I sat in the darkness, breathing hard, as if I had just run a marathon. The tears that had been threatening to fall earlier were gone. They had evaporated in the heat of a pure, cold rage. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't the grieving daughter mourning the loss of a trinket. I was a hunter who had just found the praise trail. I looked at the closed laptop. Inside that machine, on that hard drive, I had them. I had the audio of them discussing the forgery. I had the admission of the debts. I had the intent to defraud. I had Kendra mocking the dead woman whose house she was stealing. They thought they had locked the doors. They thought they had cut the lines. They thought that by changing the Wi-Fi password, they had silenced the house. But the house had eyes. And now, those eyes were mine. I reached for my phone. It was late, past midnight. But I didn't care. I needed to make a call. I needed to assemble my own team. Dale had his thugs in the Tahoe. I was going to bring something much more dangerous to the table. I was going to bring the law. I stood up and walked to the window of the studio. Outside, the city lights of Ridgehaven blinked indifferently, but in the reflection of the glass. I saw my own face. It looked different than it had this morning. The softness was gone. The hesitation was gone. Dale wanted 48 hours. I would give them to him. I would let him think he had gotten away with it. I would let him walk into that closing meeting thinking he was the smartest man in the room. Because when you catch someone on tape admitting they are about to commit a crime, you don't interrupt them while they are planning it. You wait until they execute it. You wait until the money is on the table and the pen is in their hand. That is when the trap snaps shut. I turned back to the room. The smell of stale coffee suddenly irrelevant. I had work to do. The morning sun that filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of Lasker Row did not feel warm. It felt judging. This was a firm built on old money, oak paneling, and the kind of silence that usually costs $500 an hour to experience. I sat in a leather wingback chair that was likely older than I was, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. Across from me sat Mitchell Lasker. He had been my mother's attorney for 20 years, a man who wore three-piece suits as if they were a second skin and viewed emotions as inefficient variables in the grand equation of law. He had drafted my mother's first will when I was 12, handled her estate planning when she got sick, and now he was the first person I had come to see after the eviction. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking at the laptop I had placed on his pristine mahogany desk. I had just played him the clip of Dale and Kendra in the library, the clip of the confession. The video ended. The screen went black, for a long moment. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Mitchell did not move. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, had gone pale. He took a slow breath, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up at me, his eyes were hard. This is not just a civil dispute. Phoebe, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I nodded. I know. This is forgery, he continued, ticking the points off on his fingers. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. This is intent to sell property he knows he does not own to satisfy an illegal debt. This is a felony. Several felonies, actually. He reached for the phone on his desk. I am calling the district attorney, Mitchell said, his hand hovering over the receiver. We will get an emergency injunction. We will get a temporary restraining order to freeze the assets and block him from entering the premises. We can have the police at Willow Ridge within the hour to remove him. My hand shot out and covered his. No, I said. Mitchell froze. He looked at my hand on his, then up at my face, confused. Phoebe, he said slowly, as if speaking to a traumatized child. You do not understand. He is trying to sell your mother's house. He is trying to steal the equity. We have to stop the sale. We have to block him immediately. Do not call them, I said, my voice steady. Put the phone down. Mitchell? He hesitated, but he lowered his hand. Why, he asked. He is destroying the estate. Every minute he is in there is a risk. I leaned forward. The leather of the chair creaked. If we get an injunction now, what happens? I asked him. Mitchell frowned. The sale stops. The court freezes the title. We enter litigation to prove the deed is forged. And Dale, I pressed. Where does Dale go? Mitchell sighed. Well, until the forgery is proven in court, which could take months, he would likely be allowed to remain in the residence as the surviving spouse. Provided he does not damage the property, it becomes a civil battle. He stays in the house. He fights us. He claims the recording is taken out of context. He claims he was drunk. He claims I manipulated the video. Exactly. I said. I sat back, crossing my arms. If we stop him now, we just warn him. I explained. He will know I have the footage. He will destroy the rest of the evidence. He will find another way to bleed the accounts that I cannot track. He will live in my mother's house, sleeping in her bed with his mistress. For the 2 or 3 years it takes to drag this through probate court, he will use the estate's own money to pay for his defense against me. Mitchell stared at me. The grandfatherly warmth was fading from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, assessing look. He was realizing that the little girl he used to give peppermint candies to was gone. In her place was a woman who assessed risk for a living. So what do you want? Mitchell asked. I want him out. I said, not just paused. I want him erased. I do not want a settlement. I do not want a long negotiation where he walks away with a payout just to make him leave. I want him to have nothing. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the desk. These are the bank statements from the last 6 months. I said, look at the cash withdrawals. Look at the dates. He was pulling daily maximums from 3 different accounts while Mom was in the ICU. I flipped the page, and these are the receipts for my mother's jewelry. The sapphire ring, the diamond tennis bracelet, the vintage pearls. They are all missing from the safe. I have photos of Kendra wearing the ring yesterday. Mitchell opened the folder. He scanned the documents, his eyes darting back and forth. He was a lawyer. He knew what he was looking at. He was looking at a paper trail of systematic theft. He is desperate, Mitchell murmured. He is not just greedy. He is drowning. He owes money to people who drive black SUVs and wait outside funerals. I said, he needs this sale to go through on Friday. He needs that wire transfer to hit his account, or he is a dead man. I took a deep breath. This was the gamble. This was the moment I committed to the cliff's edge. If we block the sale, he enters survival mode. I said, he will burn the house down for the insurance money if he has to. I know him. He is a cornered rat. Mitchell looked up from the papers. You have a plan. I do not want to stop him from selling the house. I said clearly. Mitchell's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me, I want to let him do it. I said, I want to let him list it. I want to let him accept the offer. I want to let him walk into the closing room. I want to let him pick up the pen and sign his name on the final bill of sale. Mitchell opened his mouth to object, but I cut him off. Because if he signs that closing document, it is no longer just a plan. I said, It is no longer just a conspiracy. It is wire fraud. It is a completed federal crime. It is grand larceny. I looked Mitchell dead in the eye. I want to catch him when the ink is wet. The room fell silent again. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. He looked at the portrait of the firm's founder hanging on the wall, then back at me. He was processing the legal implications. He was weighing the ethics, but mostly, he was looking at the sheer tactical brutality of what I was suggesting. It is dangerous. Phoebe, he said softly, to let a fraudulent transaction proceed to the closing table. You are walking a very fine line. We have to ensure that no innocent third party loses money. We have to ensure the title does not actually transfer in a way that is irreversible. I will handle the buyer side, I said. I will make sure the money is real, but the risk is contained. I just need you to handle the legal framework. Can we do it? Mitchell stood up. He walked over to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. It was locked with a heavy brass key which he kept on his watch chain. He unlocked it and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He brought it back to the desk and placed it between us. This is your mother's last will and testament, Mitchell said. The real one, the one she signed 5 years ago, when she was of sound mind and body. He placed his hand on the envelope. She knew. Phoebe, he said. My throat tightened. She knew what? She knew Dale was weak. Mitchell said, she loved him, in her own way, or perhaps she just did not want to be alone in her final years. But she knew he was not a man to be trusted with the keys to the kingdom. She came to me a year before she got sick. She said she was worried about his gambling. She said she was worried that if anything happened to her, he would liquidate everything she had built for you. Mitchell tapped the envelope. She built a fail-safe into this will, he said, a poison pill. He opened the envelope and pulled out the document. He turned to page 12 and pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. Read this. He commanded. I leaned in. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear. I hereby grant to my husband, Dale Mercer, a life estate in the property known as Willow Ridge. He shall have the right to reside in the property for the remainder of his natural life, provided that he maintains the property, pays all applicable taxes, and does not attempt to sell, mortgage, encumber, or otherwise transfer any interest in the property. Any attempt to alienate the title or use the property as collateral for debt shall result in the immediate and automatic termination of this life estate, with full fee simple title reverting instantly to my daughter, Phoebe Hayes. I read it twice, then I read it a third time. She did not leave him the house. I whispered, no, Mitchell said. She left him a roof over his head. She wanted to make sure he was not homeless, but she knew he would try to cash out, so she made the gift conditional on his behavior. He looked at me, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. The moment he signed that listing agreement, he was already violating the terms. Mitchell said, but the moment he signs a deed trying to transfer title, that is the trigger. He strips himself of the only right he has. He evicts himself. I sat back, feeling a wave of awe for the woman my mother had been. She had been sick. She had been tired. But she had been brilliant. She had set a trap from beyond the grave. So, I said, my mind racing, if we stop him now, he technically still has the life estate. He can argue he made a mistake. He can argue he didn't understand the will. He keeps the house. Correct, Mitchell said. If we intervene today, he is still the life tenant. He stays. But if we let him sign the sale papers, I trailed off. If he signs, Mitchell finished. He commits fraud against the buyer, and he simultaneously triggers the termination clause of the will. He loses the house to you, and he goes to prison for the fraud. It was perfect. It was terrifyingly perfect. But there is a condition, Mitchell said, his voice turning stern again. If we do this, Phoebe, we have to be surgically clean. We cannot entrap him. We cannot force him to sign. He has to do every single step of his own free will. We provide the rope, but he has to tie the knot. He will, I said. He is desperate. He is already tying it. Mitchell nodded. And we need to protect the buyer. We need to be ready for the closing. It is scheduled for Friday. 48 hours, Mitchell said, checking his watch. That is not a lot of time to organize a sting operation. It is enough, I said. He thinks he is rushing us, but he is just rushing to his own funeral. Mitchell began to write, his pen scratching loudly against the paper. I will contact a private investigator I use for sensitive cases, he said. We need a verifiable chain of custody for that video footage. We need someone to document his movements between now and Friday. We need to prove he is acting with full intent. I can give you his location. I said, I still have access to the car's GPS history through the family account. Good, Mitchell said without looking up. Keep that access. Do not let him know you are watching. Let him think you are defeated. Let him think you are scared. I am scared, I admitted, but not of him. Mitchell paused. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You are your mother's daughter. Phoebe, you have the leverage. Now you just need the nerve. I stood up. I gathered the files, the laptop, and the evidence of the life that had been stolen from me. I have the nerve. I said. I walked to the door. One more thing. Mitchell called out. I turned back. When we walk into that closing room, he warned, it is going to get ugly. He will realize his life is over. Desperate men do dangerous things. I touched the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of the hard drive inside. I know. I said, that is why I want him to sign first. I want him to feel the victory. I want him to think he has won. Because the fall is much harder when you think you are flying. Mitchell nodded slowly. Go home, Phoebe, he said. Get some rest. We have a house to steal back. I walked out of the office and into the lobby. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely, but I barely saw her. I walked out onto the street, into the bustling noise of the city. The sun was brighter now. The air felt cleaner. I pulled my phone out. I had a notification from the smart home system. Motion detected master bedroom. I didn't open the camera app. I didn't need to see Kendra trying on more of my mother's clothes. I didn't need to see Dale packing boxes. Let them pack, I thought. They were just doing the heavy lifting for me. I hailed a cab. I had to go back to the studio apartment. I had to plan the next phase. Mitchell was handling the law. I had to handle the buyer. I had to create a target so tempting, so perfect, that Dale wouldn't be able to resist biting the hook. I needed a buyer with cash. I needed a buyer in a hurry. I needed a buyer who didn't exist. As the cab pulled away, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. Enjoy the house. Dale, I whispered, you have exactly 2 days left. Mitchell Lasker pulled the thick document from the envelope and laid it flat on the desk between us. The paper was heavy, cream-colored bond, the kind that whispers authority when you turn a page. He smoothed it out with a reverence that made my throat tighten. This was not just a legal contract. This was my mother's voice, speaking from beyond the grave. He pointed to a section titled, Article 4, Residential Rights. Read this carefully. Phoebe, Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost professorial tone, this is the safety net she built. And this is the noose he's about to put his head into. I leaned over the desk, reading the dense paragraphs. My eyes scanned the legal terminology fee simple. Remainder interest, life tenancy. I looked up at Mitchell, struggling to parse the density of the language. Translate it for me, I said, in plain English. Mitchell took off his glasses and looked me in the eye. It is called a life estate, he explained. Your mother did not leave the house to him, but she did not want to throw him out on the street, either. She knew he had nowhere else to go. So, she gave him the right to live at Willow Ridge for the rest of his natural life. I stared at him, feeling a flush of indignation. So he gets to stay. He gets to live there with Kendra. He gets to sleep in her room, drink her wine, and play Lord of the Manor until he dies of old age. That sounds like he won. Mitchell held up a hand. Wait, he said sharply. Listen to the rest. He has the right to occupy. He has the right to use. But he does not have the right to waste. And most importantly, He absolutely does not have the right to alienate. Alienate, I asked. Sell. Mitchell clarified. Mortgage, transfer, use as collateral. He owns the right to sit in the living room and breathe the air. He does not own the bricks. He does not own the land. He is essentially a tenant who pays no rent. But the moment he dies, the property reverts fully to you. He tapped the paper again, his finger resting on a bolded paragraph at the bottom of the page. But here is the genius of Elizabeth Hayes, Mitchell said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. She knew his character. She knew that simply living there would not be enough for him. She knew he would see the house as a giant ATM. So she added a defeasance clause, a self-destruct button. I read the bold text. In the event that the life tenant attempts to sell, convey, encumber, or mortgage the property, or commits any act asserting fee simple ownership adverse to the remainder man, this life estate shall immediately and automatically terminate, and all rights of possession shall revert instantly to the remainder man. I sat back in the leather chair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. I looked at Mitchell, processing the magnitude of what I had just read. If he just sat still, I whispered, if he just lived there. If he just accepted that he had a roof over his head and kept his head down, he would be safe. Mitchell nodded. Yes, if Dale Mercer did nothing. He could live in a $2 million estate for free until the day he died. You could not evict him. I could not evict him. He would be untouchable. The irony washed over me, cold and bitter. Dale was acting out of panic and greed. He was terrified of the debts he had accrued. Yes, but he was also arrogant. He thought he was entitled to the equity. He thought he could turn my mother's legacy into a quick $300,000 to pay off his bookies and buy a condo in Florida. But by trying to grab the cash, he was destroying the one thing he actually possessed. He is evicting himself, I said, the realization settling in. The moment he tries to sell it, he loses the right to live in it. Precisely, Mitchell said. He is holding a winning lottery ticket that pays out in shelter and security. And he is about to light it on fire because he wants the cash value of the paper it is printed on. It was tragic, in a Shakespearean sort of way. My mother had offered him a lifeline, a generous, humane, undeserved lifeline. She had protected him from his own incompetence, but she had known that his greed was stronger than his survival instinct. Mitchell reached into the file again and pulled out a smaller envelope. It was blue, the stationery my mother used for thank-you notes. On the front, in her elegant, looping script, was my name. She wanted you to have this when the time came, Mitchell said softly. I took the envelope. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The scent of her perfume lavender and old paper drifted up, hitting me harder than the smell of the funeral lilies ever could. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. My dearest Phoebe, if you are reading this, then Dale has done something foolish. I have loved him, but I am not blind to who he is. He is a man who builds castles on sand. I have tried to shore up his foundations, but I cannot do it from where I'm going. He will try to take what isn't his, not because he is evil, but because he is weak. Weak men do terrible things when they are frightened. Do not fight him with screaming. My love, do not fight him with tears. Anger burns out, and tears dry up. Fight him with the truth. The truth is the only weapon that doesn't break. The house is yours. It has always been yours. Take it back, love, Mom. I lowered the letter. A single tear escaped, tracking hot down my cheek, but I did not wipe it away. I let it fall onto my hand. Weak men do terrible things when they are frightened. She was right. Dale wasn't a mastermind. He was a frightened animal, gnawing off his own leg to escape a trap, not realizing that the trap was the only thing keeping him from falling off a cliff. I looked up at Mitchell. The grief was still there, but it had crystallized into something hard and sharp. She gave him a chance, I said. She gave him a home, and he spat on it. Mitchell replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. He forged a deed. He insulted her memory, and now he is trying to defraud a stranger to pay for his sins. Mitchell leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. We have a problem, though, Phoebe. We cannot let a real buyer walk into this if he sells the house to an innocent family. And we spring this trap. That family gets dragged into years of litigation. Their money gets tied up in escrow. They become victims. We cannot do that. I nodded. I knew this. My mother wouldn't want innocent people caught in the crossfire. So we need a buyer who isn't real. I said. Mitchell nodded. Exactly. We need a straw buyer. Someone who looks legitimate on paper. Someone with proof of funds. Someone who can move fast. Offer cash. And ask 0 questions. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file marked Crown Harbor Holdings. I have a client, Mitchell said, choosing his words carefully. A corporate entity. They specialize in high-risk acquisitions. They owe me a favor. I can set up a shell purchase through them. We will present an all-cash offer to Dale this afternoon. We will offer a quick closing. 48 hours. He looked at me. The money will be real, in the sense that it will be verified in an escrow account. Dale will see the proof of funds. He will think he has hooked a whale. But the money will never leave the control of the escrow agent. I listened to the plan. It was clean. It was surgical. It isolated the damage radius to exactly 2 people, Dale Mercer and Kendra Vaughn. But there was one thing I needed to be sure of. No collateral damage. I said firmly, no real estate agents getting sued, no clerks getting fired. We will use my contacts for the title company. Mitchell assured me. We will control the environment. The only person committing a crime in that room will be Dale. I looked at the bold text on the will again. Immediate and automatic termination. He was going to walk into that room thinking he was a king. He was going to sign his name, thinking he was trading a house for a pile of cash. And in that exact second, he was going to strip himself of the only thing keeping him off the street. It was not just justice. It was poetic. I ran my thumb over my mother's signature on the letter. She had set the stage. She had written the script. All I had to do was direct the final scene. Do it. I said to Mitchell, set up the entity, make the offer. Mitchell nodded and reached for his phone. One condition, I added. He paused. Receiver in hand. I want to be there, I said, not hiding in the back, not watching on a camera. When he signs that paper, when he triggers the clause, I want to be sitting across the table. Mitchell hesitated. It is risky. Phoebe, he might get violent. I looked at the will. I remembered the way Dale had looked at me in the kitchen, dismissing me, telling me to get my trash out. Let him try. I said. Mitchell studied my face for a long moment. He must have seen something there, perhaps a reflection of the woman who had written that will, because he nodded slowly. Very well, he said. We will structure the closing so you are the representative for the buyer. He won't know until you walk through the door. I stood up. The heavy feeling in my chest had lightened. It wasn't happiness. I would never be happy about this situation, but it was clarity. I looked down at the document one last time. He has a life estate, I murmured. He has a home, and he's going to sell it for nothing. I picked up my bag, draw up the offer. Mitchell, make it attractive. Make it irresistible. I walked to the door, stopping with my hand on the brass knob. I will help him sign, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If he wants to sell my mother's legacy so badly, I will personally hand him the pen. The creation of Crown Harbor Holdings, LLC, took Mitchell exactly 45 minutes. It was a shell entity, a ghost in the corporate machine, registered in Delaware with a generic address and a board of directors that existed only on paper. To the outside world, it looked like a mid-sized investment firm looking to park capital. To Dale Mercer, it was going to look like God himself reaching down to pull him out of the fire. I sat across from Mitchell as he drafted the offer letter. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. We were no longer attorney and grieving client. We were architects of a sting operation. We need a reason for the speed, Mitchell said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. If we just offer cash with a 48-hour closing for no reason, he might get suspicious. Even a desperate man knows that real estate deals usually take 30 days. Tell him it is a 1031 exchange, I said immediately, Mitchell paused and looked up at me, a gleam of approval in his eyes. "Smart," he said. I nodded. It was the perfect cover. A 1031 exchange was a tax loophole that allowed an investor to sell a property and reinvest the proceeds into a new property to defer capital gains taxes. The catch was the strict timeline. If the investor did not identify and close on the new property within a specific window, they got hit with a massive tax bill. "Tell him the buyer just had a deal fall through in Charlotte," I instructed. "Tell him they have millions sitting in escrow that they need to place immediately, or they lose 40% to the IRS. That explains the cash. That explains the rush. And that explains why they won't bother with an inspection." Mitchell typed it out. He set the offer price at $1.8 million. Willow Ridge was worth at least $2.5 million in the current market. But we couldn't offer full price. Full price looks like a setup. A lowball offer looks like a shark smelling blood. Dale would believe a shark. He understood predation. Mitchell hit send. "Now, we wait," he said. I did not wait in his office. I went back to my studio apartment, or my command center. As I had started to think of it, I opened the laptop and pulled up the ghost feed from the library camera. Dale was sitting at the desk, his head in his hands. He looked worse than he had the day before. His skin was gray, and he was shaking his leg with a nervous, frantic energy. His phone was sitting on the desk in front of him. Silent. Kendra was pacing behind him, smoking a cigarette inside the house, something my mother never would have allowed. "They are going to kill us." "Dale," she hissed. "You said you had a buyer." "I am working on it," Dale snapped, not lifting his head. "You have been working on it for 2 days," she shot back. "If we don't have the money by Friday." The computer on the desk pinged. It was the Outlook notification sound, a single, cheerful chime that cut through the tension in the room. Dale froze. He looked at the monitor. Slowly. He reached out and clicked the mouse. I leaned closer to my own screen, watching his face. I saw his eyes widen. I saw his mouth fall open. He read the email, his eyes scanning back and forth rapidly. "Oh my God," he whispered. What Kendra asked, stopping her pacing. Dale stood up. He looked like a man who had just been pulled from the ocean. "Cash," he said, his voice trembling. "All cash. They want to close on Friday." Kendra rushed to the screen, leaning over his shoulder to read. 1.8 million. That is low. "Dale, the appraisal was 2.5. "Who cares?" Dale shouted, turning to her with a manic grin. "Who cares about the appraisal? It is cash. Kendra, no financing contingency, no inspection. They are doing a 1031 exchange. They are desperate to close." He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. "We are saved," he said. "We pay off the loan, and we still walk away with nearly $1 million. We can go to Miami. We can start over." Kendra squealed. It was a sharp, greedy sound. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him. I watched them celebrate. I watched them dance on the grave of my mother's legacy. My expression did not change. I felt nothing but a cold. Clinical satisfaction. They had taken the bait. Then, the phone on Mitchell's desk, which I was monitoring via a speakerphone link he had set up for me, rang. It was Dale. I muted my end and listened. "Mr. Lasker, this is Dale Mercer." "Mr. Mercer." Mitchell's voice was smooth, professional. "I understand you received our offer on behalf of Crown Harbor Holdings." "I did," Dale said. He was trying to sound authoritative, trying to deepen his voice, but I could hear the tremor. "It is an interesting proposal, but the price is insulting." I rolled my eyes. He was negotiating. He was actually trying to squeeze more blood from the stone. My client is on a very tight timeline. "Mr. Mercer," Mitchell said, "that is the price for speed." "Willow Ridge is a historic estate," Dale countered. "The land alone is worth $2 million. If your client wants to close by Friday, they are paying for the privilege of skipping the line. I want $2 million. Flat, and I want the closing at 10 in the morning." I watched the video feed. Dale was winking at Kendra as he spoke, posturing. He wanted to show her he was a tough businessman. "And one more thing. Dale added, his voice dropping. The sale must remain confidential until closing. I do not want any family interference. My stepdaughter is unstable. She has been harassing me. I do not want her notified until the deed is recorded. Mitchell paused. I knew he was looking at the phone, waiting for my text. I typed quickly, "Give it to him." It didn't matter. It didn't matter if the price was $2 million or $20 million. He wasn't going to see a dime of it. If increasing the number made him feel like he had won, he would be more likely to sign. Mitchell cleared his throat. $2 million, Mitchell said. But for that price, my client expects the property to be vacated immediately upon closing. And regarding your stepdaughter, Crown Harbor. Holdings has no interest in family drama. We will include a confidentiality clause in the purchase agreement. Done, Dale said. He slammed his hand on the desk. Send the papers. I watched him hang up. He turned to Kendra and pumped his fist in the air. $2 million, he shouted. I got them up $200,000. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had just outmaneuvered a corporate investment firm. He had no idea he had just negotiated the terms of his own execution. The next few hours were a blur of logistics. Mitchell prepared the purchase agreement. I scrutinized every line. We set the closing at Summit Title and Escrow. It was a real title company, but Mitchell had a relationship with the owner. We had reserved the main conference room, the one with the high-definition security cameras used for remote notarizations. We needed the record. We needed to capture the exact moment his pen hit the paper. While Mitchell handled the paperwork, I had one more loose end to tie up. The video of the confession was damning. But a defense attorney could argue intoxication. The will clause was ironclad. But Dale could argue he didn't know about it. I needed to paint a picture of character so vile that no jury, and no judge, would ever grant him leniency. I needed to prove the theft. I remembered something from the morning of the funeral. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor across the street. She was a nosy woman with too much time on her hands and a very expensive home security system. She had hated Dale since the day he moved in, calling him that oily man. I called her. Mrs. Gable, this is Phoebe Hayes. Oh, honey, she cooed. I am so sorry about your mother, and I saw that awful man lock you out. It was disgraceful. Mrs. Gable, I said, keeping my voice soft, I'm trying to sort out some of Mom's things. I think some items might have been removed from the house before the funeral. You have those cameras pointed at our driveway, don't you? I certainly do, she said, her tone sharpening. What do you need? I need to know if anyone left the house with bags late at night. Specifically, the night before the funeral. Give me 10 minutes, she said. 8 minutes later, a file landed in my email. I opened it. The footage was grainy night vision, but the subject was clear. It was 3 a.m, the night my mother lay in the funeral home awaiting burial. The front door of Willow Ridge opened. Kendra slipped out. She wasn't wearing her nurse scrubs. She was wearing dark clothes. She was carrying 2 large duffel bags. She looked around nervously, then hurried to her car, a red sedan parked on the street. Not in the driveway. She popped the trunk and heaved the bags in. They were heavy. She struggled with the weight. I paused the video and zoomed in. As she lifted the second bag, the zipper caught the light. It wasn't fully closed. Something silver glinted inside. It looked like the silver tea service my great-grandmother had brought over from England. A service that was supposed to be in the locked display cabinet in the dining room. She wasn't just stealing jewelry. She was looting the place. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. They weren't just selling the house to pay a debt. They were stripping the carcass clean before they discarded it. I forwarded the video to Mitchell. Add this to the file. I typed, grand larceny. I switched back to the live feed of the library. Night had fallen. Dale was back at the desk. The bottle of wine was empty, and he had opened a second one. He was staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He began to type, because of the angle of the camera. I couldn't see his screen, but he was muttering to himself as he typed, a habit he had when he was drunk and stressed. Friday, he mumbled, 2 million, cash. Tell your boss. Back off. He hit send. Then he slumped back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. I got it, he whispered to the empty room. I fixed it. I sat back in my cold studio apartment. He had texted the loan sharks. He had confirmed the payout. He had just connected the illegal debt to the fraudulent sale. He thought he had fixed it. He thought Friday was his Independence Day. I closed the laptop. Friday was not going to be his payday. Friday was going to be the day the house of cards he had built on my mother's suffering finally came crashing down, and I would be the one to pull the bottom card. The Thursday before the closing was a day of silence in the city, but inside my headphones, the noise was deafening. I sat at my makeshift desk, a stack of cardboard boxes topped with a piece of plywood, and listened to Dale assassinate my character. He was on the phone with the buyer's attorney, who was actually an associate of Mitchell's named Sarah. She was playing her part perfectly, asking the uncomfortable questions that a diligent lawyer would ask, pushing Dale just enough to make him spill his rehearsed lies. I need to clarify the situation regarding the daughter. Ms. Hayes, Sarah said, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. Our title search shows she lived in the property. We need to be absolutely certain she has no claim to possession. Dale laughed. It was a nervous, scratching sound. You do not need to worry about Phoebe, he said. He lowered his voice, adopting a tone of faux confidentiality that made my skin crawl. Look, I did not want to bring this up, but the girl has problems. Serious problems. What kind of problems? Sarah asked. Chemical problems. Dale lied smoothly. She has been battling addiction for years. Painkillers, mood stabilizers. She gets paranoid. She hallucinates. That is why she left so abruptly after the funeral. She knew she could not be around the temptation of her mother's medication. She signed the rights over to me because she knew she was not fit to manage the estate. I sat there, my hand gripping a pen so hard the plastic barrel cracked. Addiction. He was pinning an addiction on me. For 6 months, I had been the one counting every pill. I was the one who kept the morphine locked in a biometric safe. I was the one who logged every single milligram administered to my mother in a spreadsheet, timed to the minute, to ensure she was never in pain but never overdosed. I had been sober, vigilant, and exhausted, while he was drinking himself into a stupor in the library, and now he was using my exhaustion to paint me as a junkie to explain why I wouldn't be at the closing. It was a brilliant lie. If I showed up screaming and emotional, I would just look like the unstable addict he had described. He was gaslighting a paper trail, but he forgot that I kept receipts. I opened my physical file box. I pulled out the binder I had maintained during my mother's illness. It was 3 inches thick. Inside were the logs. October 4th, 2 p.m., 10 milligrams oxycodone administered by Phoebe Hayes. Confirmed by doctor, Eris, November 12th, 3 a.m. Patient distressed. Dosage adjusted per hospice protocol. I had emails, hundreds of them. Correspondence with oncologists, palliative care specialists, pharmacists, and insurance adjusters. Every single one of them was from me. Every single one demonstrated clarity, competence, and authority. Dale was not copied on a single one. I scanned them all. I created a digital dossier titled Capacity and Care. If he wanted to tell the court I was an addict, I would drown him in a sea of sobriety and responsibility. I would show the judge that while he was draining the bank accounts, I was the one making sure my mother died with dignity. My phone buzzed. It was Mitchell. Phoebe. Are you sitting down? He asked. I am, I said, staring at the cracked pen in my hand. What did you find? We looked at the deed again. He said, the physical document you scanned for us. We ran a trace on the notary stamp. I held my breath. The stamp had looked official. State of North Carolina, County of Wake, commission expires 2028. The notary is a man named Arthur Henderson. Mitchell said, he is a legitimate notary. He works at a shipping center about 3 miles from Willow Ridge. So it is real, I asked, my heart sinking. If a real notary witnessed it, proving forgery becomes 10 times harder. That is what we thought, Mitchell said. So I called Mr. Henderson. I sent him a picture of the document, and he says he never stamped it. Mitchell said. The silence on the line was heavy. How is that possible? I asked. It is his name. It is his commission number. It is his name, Mitchell corrected. But the font is wrong, and the commission expiration date is off by 2 months. Mr. Henderson's commission expires in August. But the stamp says October. Dale or whoever helped him did not get it notarized. They bought a custom rubber stamp online with Henderson's information. But they made a typo on the date. My jaw tightened. This wasn't just forgery of a signature. This was manufacturing a government seal. We have an affidavit from Mr. Henderson on the way, Mitchell continued. He is furious. He is willing to testify that he was on vacation in the Outer Banks the day that document was supposedly signed. It is a fake stamp, I whispered. It is a felony, Mitchell said firmly. Uttering a forged instrument. Identity theft. This upgrades the charges. Phoebe, if he walks into that closing room and hands over this deed, he is going away for a long time, not just for fraud, but for counterfeiting a state seal. I hung up the phone and looked at the screen again. I needed to see the signature again. I pulled up the high-resolution scan of the deed. I placed it side by side with a check my mother had written me for my birthday 3 years ago. The difference was screaming at me now. My mother wrote in a continuous flow, her E connected to the L which flowed into the I. She never lifted the pen until the end of the word. It was muscle memory, ingrained over 50 years of handwriting. The signature on the deed was a series of stops and starts. I zoomed in on the loops. There were tiny ink blots at the bottom of the curves, hesitation marks. The person writing this had paused to look at a reference, to see where the line should go next. It was drawn, not written. It was a drawing of a signature. I saved the comparison image. Another nail in the coffin. But I wasn't done. The lie about my addiction bothered me. It felt specific. It felt like a defense mechanism he had been building for a while. Why was he so desperate to discredit me specifically? I went back to the bank records. I knew about the cash withdrawals, but I dug deeper into the inquiries. I found it in the credit report section of the family file. 4 months ago, while my mother was still conscious but bedridden, there was a hard inquiry on her credit report. It was from a bank we didn't use. I logged into the lender portal using the credentials I had set up for my mother years ago. I found a loan application. It was for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. Dale had applied for a $300,000 line of credit against the house. I opened the rejection letter. Reason for denial. Insufficient documentation. Co-owner signature mismatch. I froze. He hadn't just decided to sell the house after she died. He had tried to mortgage it while she was dying. He had tried to forge her signature on a loan application 4 months ago. But the bank had caught it. The bank's fraud department had flagged the signature mismatch and killed the deal. That was why he was so desperate now. He'd been trying to get this money for months. The debt wasn't new. The pressure had been building since the fall. He had failed to steal the equity then. So now, with no one left to double-check the signature, he was going for the full sale. This proved premeditation. It proved a pattern of conduct. It proved that his grief was a performance he had been rehearsing while he waited for her to die so he could try again. I printed the rejection letter. I felt a coldness spreading through my limbs that had nothing to do with the drafty apartment. I was looking at the timeline of a predator. I needed a break from the documents. I needed to see what they were doing. I checked the social media accounts. I had created a burner profile to follow Kendra, since she had blocked my main account the day after the funeral. She had posted a story on Instagram 20 minutes ago. The photo was a selfie. She was holding a glass of champagne, pouting at the camera. In the background, I could see the chaos of my mother's living room boxes stacked high, furniture pushed to the walls. The caption read, "Out with the old, in with the new. Miami vibes coming soon. Fresh start upgrade." I clicked to the next image. It was a screenshot of a travel website, flight confirmation, first class, Charlotte to Miami, departing Friday evening at 8 o'clock. They weren't even planning to stay the night after the closing. They were going to sign the papers, take the wire transfer confirmation, and fly out of the jurisdiction the same day. I looked at the date on the ticket. Friday, tomorrow. I took a screenshot. Kendra's arrogance was her weakness. She was broadcasting their flight plan to the world. She thought she was posting a brag. She was actually posting evidence of flight risk. This would ensure that when the police came, they wouldn't grant bail. I closed the browser. I had enough. I had the lies about my addiction. I had the logs proving my competence. I had the fake notary stamp. I had the hesitation marks in the signature. I had the failed loan application proving prior intent. And I had the flight tickets proving they intended to run. It was a mountain of evidence. It was enough to bury them 10 times over. But evidence in a file is just paper. Justice requires a moment of impact. I looked at the calendar on the wall. I had circled Friday in red marker. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Dale would walk into that conference room wearing his best suit. He would tell the buyers how sad he was to part with the family home. He would sign his name with a flourish, and I would be there. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Ridgehaven slick and black under the streetlights. Dale had spent the last week writing a script where I was the villain, the crazy, drug-addicted daughter who abandoned her dying mother. He had written a script where he was the tragic hero, doing what he had to do to survive. He didn't know that I had rewritten the ending. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the victim. I was the twist. I turned off the light in the studio, plunging the room into darkness. I didn't need the light anymore. I could see everything perfectly clearly. Tomorrow, we go to closing, and when the door shuts, it stays shut. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't get up to reheat it. My phone sat in the center of the plywood desk, connected to a conference call that would determine the fate of my mother's legacy. On the line were Mitchell Lasker and a woman I had never met but whose reputation I knew well, Carla Wynn, a senior investigator with the state's Financial Crimes Division. Mitchell had called in a favor. He had sent her the package, the video of the confession, the forged deed, the fake notary stamp, and the rejected HELOC application. "This is tight." Carla's voice came through the speaker. It was a voice like gravel, rough and unyielding. "You have intent. You have the instrument of fraud. And you have the history of financial distress. But the jurisdiction is tricky until the money moves. If we stop him now, it is just attempted fraud," Mitchell said, echoing the argument we had made days ago. "It is a slap on the wrist. He pleads out, gets probation, and goes back to living in the house." "Exactly." Carla agreed. "That is why I am authorizing the surveillance. But we need the transaction to cross the line. We need him to sign the final closing statement and authorize the wire transfer. The moment he accepts the funds or attempts to accept them, it becomes wire fraud. That is federal. That is when we step in." "So we let the closing proceed?" I asked, needing to hear it one more time. "We let it proceed." Carla confirmed. "I will have 2 plainclothes officers in the lobby of Summit Title. I will be in the room next door watching the feed. But Phoebe, you need to understand something." I leaned closer to the phone. "What once he signs? He is technically committed, but if he gets spooked before the pen hits the paper, if he sees you and runs, we lose the leverage. You have to be invisible until the very last second. I won't be seen. I promised. I will be the last person to walk through that door." The plan was set. It was a delicate, high-wire act of legal maneuvering. We weren't just catching a thief. We were orchestrating a piece of theater where the main actor didn't know he was auditioning for a prison cell. Mitchell took over the logistics. The room at Summit Title was booked for 10 o'clock the next morning. It was a corner office with glass walls, but we had arranged for the blinds to be drawn for privacy. We needed the environment to feel controlled, exclusive, exactly the way a high-stakes cash deal should feel. Mitchell warned me about my role. "You are the closer, Phoebe," he said, "but you are also the trigger. When you walk in, the dynamic shifts. He is going to panic. You cannot react to his panic. You have to be the calmest person in the room. You state the facts. You lay down the will. You point out the forgery. You do not scream. You do not cry. You let the evidence scream for you." "I understand." I said, "I will be ice." After the call. I spent the afternoon preparing my script. I didn't write it down. I memorized it. I needed the words to come out naturally, with the weight of absolute truth. First, the will. I rehearsed the explanation of the life estate, the generous gift my mother had given him. Second, the violation, the clause that stripped him of that gift the moment he tried to sell. Third, the crime, the fake notary stamp, the forged signature, the theft. It was a three-part indictment: short, brutal, undeniable. As evening fell, I turned my attention to my wardrobe. This might seem trivial to some, but in my world, and in Dale's world, appearance was currency. Dale would be wearing his best suit, trying to project the image of a wealthy widower moving on. Kendra would be dripping in labels, trying to look like the lady of the house. I opened my suitcase. I pushed aside the black funeral dress. I didn't want to look like a mourner. I didn't want to look like a victim. I chose a navy blue suit, tailored and sharp, a crisp white silk blouse, no jewelry except for my watch. I pulled my hair back into a low, tight bun. I looked in the cracked mirror of the bathroom. I didn't look like Phoebe the stepdaughter. I looked like Phoebe the fiduciary. I looked like the person you hire to fire someone. The contrast would be jarring. They would be dressed for a cocktail party. I would be dressed for an execution. Around 7 o'clock. My phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. He just called the title company. He asked if we could do the closing remotely. Said he didn't want to come in because of paparazzi concerns. I scoffed. Paparazzi Dale Mercer was a nobody. He was paranoid. He was afraid that if he stepped out into the open, someone would see him. He was afraid of being watched. What did you tell him? I texted back. We told him the buyer requires a physical presence for the wet ink signature on the deed. Standard policy for cash deals over $1 million. We told him no physical signature, no wire. Did he buy it? He complained, but he agreed. He is greedy. Phoebe, the money is the only thing he sees. He will walk through fire if he thinks there is a check on the other side. We had him. He was trying to hide, but his avarice was dragging him into the light, to keep the pressure on. Sarah, acting as the buyer's attorney, sent a follow-up email to Dale at 8 o'clock. It was a masterpiece of corporate impatience. Mr. Mercer, please confirm you will be on site at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. Our client has another closing at noon and will pull the funds if there are any delays. Please bring all keys and garage openers to the table. It was the final turn of the screw. It forced him to focus on the logistics of the handover, making the sale feel inevitable, a done deal that just needed a rubber stamp. I opened the laptop one last time. I needed to see them. The feed from the library was dark, but the master bedroom was lit up like a stage. Dale and Kendra were there. The room was a disaster zone of open suitcases and discarded clothes. They were packing, but they weren't just packing, they were celebrating. A bottle of champagne sat on the nightstand, my mother's favorite vintage, Dom Perignon, which she saved for anniversaries. They were drinking it out of the bottle. Dale was holding up a stack of papers, the closing documents Mitchell had sent over for review. He waved them in the air like a trophy. Tomorrow, baby, he shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. Tomorrow we are free. Kendra was dancing around the room, spinning in circles. She was wearing a white dress, something that looked disturbingly like a bridal gown, though cut much shorter. No more gloomy house, she yelled. No more creeping around. We get the money, and we are gone. She stopped and looked at Dale. What about the girl, she asked. What if she finds out? Dale laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that made me wince. Let her find out. By the time she realizes the house is sold, we will be on the beach. What is she going to do? Sue me? I will have the cash in an offshore account before she can even file the paperwork. She gets nothing. The house is gone. The money is gone. And we win. He grabbed Kendra and kissed her. Sloppy and aggressive. We win. He repeated against her mouth. I watched them. I watched the way they desecrated the room where my mother had spent her final days. I watched the arrogance, the utter lack of remorse. They truly believed they had pulled it off. They believed that the world was stupid and that they were the clever ones. They believed that because I had been quiet, I was weak. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of the sniper who has waited 3 days in the mud for the target to show his face. Enjoy the champagne. Dale, I whispered to the screen. Drink it all. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to watch anymore. I lay down on the mattress, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. I thought about the timer he had set on the kitchen table. 1 hour. He had given me 1 hour to pack my life. Tomorrow. I wouldn't give him an hour. I wouldn't give him a minute. I would give him exactly the amount of time it took for the ink to dry. I closed my eyes, visualizing the conference room, the mahogany table, the leather chairs, the silence before the storm. Tomorrow. The fun ends. Tomorrow. The house changes hands. But not the way they think. Tomorrow. I take it back. The Friday morning sky over Ridgehaven was a bruise of purple and charcoal gray. Hanging low and heavy above the city, it was the kind of weather that made the streetlights flicker on at 10 in the morning, casting long, unnatural shadows across the wet pavement. I stood in a small, windowless observation room adjacent to the main conference suite at Summit Title and Escrow, watching a monitor that displayed a high-definition feed of the room next door. Beside me stood Carla Wynn, the financial crimes investigator. She was motionless, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes fixed on the screen with the predatory focus of a hawk spotting a field mouse. Mitchell Lasker was pacing slightly behind us, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "He is late," Mitchell murmured. "He is not late," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "He is making an entrance. He thinks he is the most important person in the world today." On the screen, the heavy oak door of the conference room swung open. Dale Mercer walked in. He was wearing a suit that I recognized. It was an Armani that my mother had bought him 5 years ago for a charity gala. He had gained weight since then, the stress eating and the alcohol taking their toll, and the fabric pulled tight across his chest and shoulders. He walked with a swagger that was too wide, too loud, a desperate performance of confidence meant to hide the fact that he was vibrating with anxiety. Trailing behind him was Kendra. She was glued to her phone, barely looking up as she entered the room. She wore a white dress that was entirely inappropriate for a business meeting, and on her feet were strappy sandals better suited for a beach club than a title company, but it was her hand that drew my eye. Even on the grainy monitor, the flash of blue was unmistakable. The sapphire ring, my grandmother's ring. She wore it openly, arrogantly, flashing it every time she swiped the screen of her phone. "Please, have a seat," said Sarah, Mitchell's associate who was posing as the attorney for Crown Harbor Holdings. She gestured to the leather chairs on the far side of the mahogany table. Dale threw his leather portfolio onto the table with a loud thud. "Let us get this done," Dale said, rubbing his hands together. "We have a flight to catch." Sarah smiled, a tight, professional expression that gave nothing away. "Of course, Mr. Mercer, my clients are eager to close as well. We have the wire transfer queued and ready for release upon execution of the documents." At the mention of the wire, Dale's eyes lit up. He licked his lips. It was a subtle, involuntary movement, but on the large monitor, it looked grotesque. "We are ready," Dale said. "Where do I sign?" "Not yet," I whispered to the screen. Sarah opened a thick folder. She pulled out the settlement statement and the deed transfer documents. She laid them out in a neat row, but she did not hand him the pen yet. "Before we proceed," Sarah said, clasping her hands on top of the papers, "there are a few standard compliance questions we need to clear up for the title insurance policy." Dale frowned, his impatience flaring. "We went over this on the phone. The title is clean. We need to address the heirship," Sarah said calmly. "The title search indicates that Elizabeth Hayes Mercer had a daughter, Phoebe Hayes. Is that correct?" I leaned in closer to the monitor. This was the trap. This was the moment where silence was not enough. He had to lie. He had to put the lie on the record. Dale stiffened. He glanced at Kendra, who was busy scrolling through photos of an island resort, ignoring the conversation entirely. "Yes, she had a daughter," Dale said, his voice dropping an octave. "But as I told you, she is not involved." "Is she contesting the sale?" Sarah asked. "Does she have any claim to the property?" Dale laughed. A harsh, dismissive sound. "No," he said. Absolutely not. Phoebe knows the house is mine. I gave her a significant cash settlement earlier this week. $50,000. Just to help her get on her feet. She signed a waiver of interest. She is done. She has moved on. I felt Mitchell stiffen beside me. That is a direct lie, Mitchell whispered. He never gave you a dime. Let him keep talking, Carla said, her voice like grinding stone. The more he says, the deeper the hole. Sarah nodded, pretending to take a note. And you mentioned a medical condition. We need to be sure she was of sound mind if she signed a waiver. Dale sighed, putting on a face of tragic burden. It is sad. Really, he said, leaning forward to confide in her. Phoebe has struggled with addiction for a decade. Opioids. She is unstable. Half the time she does not know what day it is. That is why her mother left everything to me, to protect the assets from being snorted up a nose or injected into a vein. Phoebe agreed to step away because she knows she cannot handle the responsibility. My hands curled into fists at my sides. My nails dug into my palms until I felt the sharp sting of pain. Addiction. He was painting me as a junkie to explain my absence, while he was the one selling my mother's legacy to pay a gambling debt. The projection was so absolute it was almost impressive. I see, Sarah said. Thank you for clarifying. And you are the sole owner of the property, sole owner, Dale said firmly. Fee simple. And you have the original deed. Dale reached into his portfolio. He pulled out the document, the one with the shaky signature and the fake notary stamp. He placed it on the table as if he were laying down a royal flush in a poker game. Right here, he said, notarized and ready to record. Carla Wynne spoke into her headset, her voice barely audible. Suspect has presented the forged instrument. He is asserting ownership. We are green. Sarah picked up the deed. She pretended to examine it, turning it over in her hands. She looked at the stamp. She looked at the signature. It looks in order. Sarah lied. She placed it back on the table and pushed a black ballpoint pen toward him. Then we are ready to close, she said. Please sign the grant deed and the settlement statement. Once you sign, I will authorize the escrow officer to release the funds. $2 million, minus the closing costs. Dale snatched the pen. He didn't read the documents. He didn't check the math. He flipped to the signature page of the deed. He signed his name, Dale Mercer. He signed it fast, a jagged scrawl of adrenaline. He signed the settlement statement. He signed the tax affidavits. He signed the occupancy certification. With every stroke of the pen, he was sealing his fate. He wasn't just selling a house. He was signing a confession. There, Dale said, dropping the pen. It clattered loudly on the wooden table. Done. Send the money. Sarah nodded to the escrow officer sitting at the end of the table. The officer typed a command into her laptop. Wire initiated. The officer said, Status is pending. Dale let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. He slumped back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. He reached over and squeezed Kendra's knee. We did it, babe, he said. Kendra finally looked up from her phone. Is the money there? It is pending, Dale said, his voice trembling with excitement. That means it is in the air. It will hit the account in minutes. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from grief, but from the sheer, overwhelming rush of getting away with it. He laughed, a giddy, high-pitched sound. $2 million, he whispered. I looked at Mitchell. I looked at Carla. Now, I said. Carla nodded. Go. I stepped out of the observation room and into the hallway. The carpet swallowed the sound of my heels. Mitchell walked beside me, his face set in a grim line. We reached the double doors of the conference room. I didn't knock. I pushed the doors open with both hands, letting them swing wide and hit the stops with a heavy thud. The sound shattered the celebration inside. Dale jumped in his seat, spinning around. Kendra dropped her phone on the table. For a second, there was total silence. Dale stared at me. He blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked at my suit. He looked at my clean hair, my steady gaze. He looked for the addict he had described, The broken girl he had evicted. He didn't find her. "Phoebe," he stammered. His face went from flushed to pale in the span of a single heartbeat. "What? What are you doing here?" I walked into the room. I didn't stop until I was standing at the opposite end of the table, directly across from him. Mitchell stood at my shoulder like a sentinel. I looked at the papers scattered on the table. I looked at the pen. I looked at the deed. "You are too late," Dale said, his voice cracking. He tried to summon his arrogance, but it was fragile now, cracking under the weight of my presence. "We just closed. The papers are signed. The house is sold. You can't stop it." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out." "Phoebe, I told you. I sold it." I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. I leaned forward, looking him dead in the eye. "No, Dale," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and clear. "You didn't sell it." I looked at the escrow officer. "Cancel the wire." The officer nodded and typed a single key. "Transaction canceled." Dale's eyes bulged. "What?" "No. You can't do that. It is signed." I looked back at him. "I am not too late." "Dale," I said, "I am exactly on time." Mitchell stepped forward. He reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a lawsuit. He didn't pull out an injunction. He pulled out the heavy cream envelope containing my mother's true last will and testament. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the wood, stopping inches from Dale's trembling hand. "What is this?" Dale whispered. "That," Mitchell said, his voice booming in the small room, "is the document that governs the property you just tried to sell." Dale looked at the envelope, then at me. Confusion was quickly being replaced by terror. I stepped back from the table as the door behind me opened again. Carla Wynne walked in. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing her windbreaker with the state seal on the chest, and she was reaching for the badge clipped to her belt, behind her. Two uniformed officers filled the doorway, blocking the exit. "Dale," I said softly, "meet the real buyers." Dale shot up from his chair. Knocking it backward, it hit the floor with a crash. He looked at the window, but the blinds were drawn. He looked at the door, but the police were there. He looked at Kendra. Kendra had stood up, backing away until her spine hit the wall. Her face was white. She looked at Dale like he was a stranger. "We have a problem." "Mr. Mercer," Carla said, her voice dry and hard. Dale looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide, pleading, terrified. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was the realization that the trap had not just sprung, it had shattered his leg. It wasn't a sale. "Dale," I said, "it was a test, and you just failed." The room was small, but the silence that followed my declaration was vast. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of Dale's lungs. He stood frozen, his hand halfway extended toward the papers he had just signed, as if he could somehow snatch the ink back into the pen and undo the last 5 minutes. Mitchell Lasker stepped forward. He did not look like the kindly family attorney anymore. He looked like an executioner reading a warrant. He picked up the will he had thrown on the table and opened it to the page we had flagged. "You did not read the fine print." "Dale," Mitchell said, his voice slicing through the tension, "you were so busy counting the money that you never bothered to check what you actually owned." Dale stammered, his eyes darting between the police officers and the document. "I own the house. She left it to me. I am her husband. She left you a life estate," Mitchell corrected, tapping the paper with a manicured finger. "Do you know what that means? It means you had the right to live there. You had the right to a roof over your head for as long as you breathed. That was her mercy. That was her gift to a man who did not deserve it." Mitchell flipped the page, but there was a condition. He continued, "A defeasance clause. It states clearly that any attempt by the life tenant to sell, mortgage, or encumber the property results in the immediate and automatic termination of the estate." Mitchell looked up, locking eyes with Dale. "The second you signed that deed, Dale, you did not sell the house. You evicted yourself. You triggered the clause. The life estate is void. The property now reverts instantly and fully to the remainder man. Mitchell gestured to me. Phoebe Hayes is now the sole legal owner of Willow Ridge. You are trespassing. Dale's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He slumped against the wall, his legs giving out. No, he whispered. That is a trick. You are twisting words. I didn't know. It was a mistake. A mistake. I stepped in. My voice sharp. I pulled the file from my bag, the one containing the rejected loan application. I slammed it onto the table next to the forged deed. Was this a mistake too? Dale, I asked. 4 months ago, while my mother was hooked up to a ventilator, you applied for a home equity line of credit, $300,000. The bank rejected it because the signatures didn't match. I opened the file, showing him the rejection letter. You knew you didn't have the right to sell. I said, you knew the title wasn't yours to leverage. That is why you forged her signature then, and that is why you forged the deed today. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. Carla Wynne stepped forward. The gold badge on her belt caught the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room. She didn't look angry. She looked bored, which was somehow more terrifying. Let us go over the scorecard. Mr. Mercer, Carla said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. The metal ratcheting sound was loud in the quiet room. You just signed a document asserting fee simple ownership when you knew you only held a life estate. She listed, that is title fraud. You used a forged instrument, the deed with the fake notary stamp, to facilitate a transaction over $500,000. That is a Class C felony. And you attempted to receive a wire transfer of $2 million based on that fraud. But I didn't get the money, Dale shouted, desperation making his voice crack. He pointed at the escrow officer. She canceled it. The wire is pending. I didn't steal anything. Carla smiled. A cold, humorless expression. It is called wire fraud. Dale, she explained, the crime isn't spending the money. The crime is the attempt. The moment you signed that paper and authorized the transfer, the crime was complete. The fact that we stopped the cash from hitting your account just means you are going to prison broke instead of going to prison rich. Dale looked around the room, searching for an exit, searching for an ally. His eyes landed on me. For years, he had looked at me with disdain. He had looked at me as an obstacle, a nuisance, a kid who didn't understand finance. Now, he looked at me and saw the only person who could stop the walls from closing in. Phoebe, he pleaded. His voice softened, taking on that wheedling, manipulative tone he used when he wanted something from my mother. Phoebe, please, I am your father. I raised you. We are family. Don't let them do this. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. I will sign whatever you want. Just don't let them take me. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat dripping down his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes. For a second, I remembered the man who had moved into our house 10 years ago. I remembered how he had charmed my mother. I remembered how he had slowly isolated her. I remembered the countdown timer on the kitchen table 2 days ago. You are not my father. Dale, I said. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of 10 years of silence. You just lived in my mother's house. I continued. You ate her food. You drank her wine. You spent her money. You were never a father. You were a tenant, and you were a bad one. I turned to the officers. Get him out of my closing, I said. The officers moved in. They grabbed Dale by the arms. He tried to pull away, but he was weak, defeated by the sudden, crushing reality of his own actions. They spun him around and slammed him against the wall. You have the right to remain silent, one officer recited, the words familiar and final. As the handcuffs clicked around Dale's wrists, a sound of sobbing broke out from the corner of the room. It was Kendra. She was pressed against the wall near the door, clutching her purse to her chest, trying to make herself invisible. She saw Dale being cuffed and realized her free ride was over. She started to edge toward the door, her heels clicking softly on the carpet. I am just going to go, she whimpered. I didn't sign anything. This has nothing to do with me. Carla Wynne turned her head. Not so fast. Ms. Vaughn, Kendra froze. I am just the girlfriend. I didn't know what he was doing. I walked over to her. I didn't look at her face. I looked at her hand. She was still wearing it. The sapphire ring. The blue stones seemed to pulse with an angry light. I pulled up the photo on my phone, the one Mrs. Gable had sent me, showing Kendra loading the bags into her car. Then I pulled up the insurance inventory list my mother had kept. That ring, I said, pointing to her hand. That is item number 402 on the estate inventory. Vintage sapphire and diamond, valued at $25,000. It was reported stolen 3 days ago. Kendra covered her hand with her other hand, trying to hide the ring. Dale gave it to me. She shrieked. It was a gift. He didn't have the right to give it. I said, and neither did you have the right to take the silver service, the pearls, and the artwork you loaded into your trunk the night before the funeral. Carla signaled to the second officer. Possession of stolen property. Carla said, and given the value, it is grand larceny. We also have video evidence of you conspiring to defraud the estate. You are an accessory to the fraud. Kendra screamed as the officer took her arm. She fought, kicking out with her expensive sandals, her white dress bunching up around her legs. It was a pathetic, ugly scene. The lady of the manor facade had crumbled, revealing the petty thief underneath. Take it off, the officer ordered. Kendra struggled to pull the ring off her finger. She threw it onto the mahogany table. It spun on the wood, a dizzying blue blur. Before coming to a stop in front of me, I picked it up. The metal was warm from her skin. I wiped it on my jacket, cleaning away the taint of her greed, and slipped it into my pocket. I watched them drag Dale and Kendra out of the room. Dale was weeping now. Loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the hallway. He looked back at me one last time before the elevator doors closed. He looked small. He looked like exactly what my mother had said. He was a weak man who did terrible things because he was frightened. The doors shut. They were gone. The conference room was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of Mitchell's pen. He was signing the final affidavit. It is done, Mitchell said. He looked up at me, removing his glasses. The deed is void. The life estate is terminated. The title is 100% yours. Phoebe. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. My knees felt weak, and I sat down in the chair Dale had just vacated. Thank you. Mitchell, I said. Carla gathered her files. She gave me a curt nod. You did good, kid. Most people would have just sued. You let him dig the grave and jump in. That took guts. It wasn't guts, I said, looking at the empty chair. It was necessity. I left the title company an hour later. The sky had cleared, the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. The sun was shining on the wet pavement, making the world look new. I drove to Willow Ridge. When I pulled up to the gate, the black Tahoe was gone. The loan sharks had likely heard the news Dale was in custody. The assets were frozen. They knew there was nothing left to collect here. They would move on to their next victim. I walked up the driveway. The for sale sign that Dale must have planned to put up was leaning against the porch, still wrapped in plastic. I kicked it over. I reached the front door. I didn't use a key. I took out my phone. I opened the smart home app. User Dale Mercer, status active. I tapped delete. User Kendra Vaughn, status active. I tapped delete. I reset the master code. I initiated a full system lockdown, changing every digital lock in the house. I typed in my new code. The lock clicked, a solid mechanical sound of obedience. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was quiet. The smell of Kendra's cheap perfume still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the stale odor of Dale's cigars. But underneath it, I could smell the old house, the cedar wood, the floor wax, the faint scent of lavender that had always been my mother. I walked through the hallway. I went into the kitchen. The countdown timer was still on the table where he had left it. It read 0. I picked it up and threw it into the trash. I walked into the library. The wine bottles were there. The mess was there. But the oppressiveness was gone. I sat down in my mother's chair. I took the sapphire ring out of my pocket and placed it on the desk. I had done it. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't fought dirty. I had just held up the mirror of truth and let them destroy themselves against it. My mother was right. The truth is the only weapon that doesn't break. I looked out the window at the garden. The flowers were blooming. The trees were swaying in the wind. The estate was safe. Revenge isn't about burning the world down. It isn't about screaming matches or violence. Sometimes, revenge is simply standing still, holding the door open, and letting the people who hurt you walk right into the prison they built for themselves. Dale was in a cell, Kendra was in booking, and I was home. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe relaxing before bed? Please let me know in the comments below so we can share this moment together. If you enjoyed seeing the greedy get what they deserve, please make sure to subscribe to Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.